The year is 1909. We are time-tripping. Child labour. In the early 20th century, childhood is often a matter of work rather than play. You must do a podcast.
It's time that you had a history lesson, so sit down here with me.
What will we do?
Well, I want to show you what life would have been like as a child 100 or so years ago. So look, you see, if you were a child 100 or so years ago, you may have had to work in a factory.
Cotton. Yeah, but we're not children from 100,000 years ago.
Not 100,000, 100 years ago.
It sounds like 100,000 every time you say that.
So you might have had to work in a factory or deliver newspapers.
Who's that man?
Oh, hello, Johnny.
Hey Phil, hello.
Kids leave.
I actually took them on an adventure already on a trip to 1909 where we're going today.
We travel year by year, event by event through the 20th century, and we've got to learn the lessons and bring an item back each. A bit of child labour, I understand. The USA, especially following a specific individual who's looking into matters of extensive child labour, endemic child labour.
Indeed, big problem back then. Were you ever involved in any labour as a child?
A little bit, I suppose, but it was sort of just a bit of work experience, really, and tutoring. I wasn't forced to sort of work down a mine or anything like that from the age of 10. So I'm going to say no, not really. I mean, of course, child labour still goes on today. Really, in a great way, it was outsourced to many other countries and pushed underground. But I won't pour cold sick too much on it because we're following quite a cool fella. Yeah.
A good point to make that child labour has been around for millennia before this, and child labour still exists today. But looking at child labour through the lens of USA, just after its rapid industrialisation, there's just a complete lack of regulation, and it's led some unscrupulous employers, shall we say, to look towards the nation's youth for cheap labour. And yeah, we're coming to a place where there are no laws or like generally accepted standards to protect the child in the workplace. So it's a pretty grim place for a child, which is why I thought I'd take the kids there.
Oh yeah.
Shall we jump in and go?
Okay. Pile in.
Time travelers. Go.
So Phil, I'm looking around, and we're outside a factory in Georgia, a sort of garment factory, the mills.
Sort of cotton mill, isn't it?
Yeah. Exactly. And we're going to be
very noisy.
Oh, very noisy. Yeah, you can hear the machine just going. It's not really a place where you'd want to be if you're a child, but if you look around inside this mill, a good proportion of these mill workers are children. I would say around about 25% of the workers in here are children. And I got us an invite to follow around a guy called Lewis Hine, and he's a interesting guy. He's got a big camera, and you can't really miss him.
A sort of kind of investigative photojournalist, one of the first, formerly a teacher, I believe. How are all these bosses who are profiting from exploitation of children just going to let him in to come and snap photos, do you think?
Well, he's got a few tricks up his sleeve if he can't get in. We're lucky we get to peer over his shoulder while he's taking these photographs today.
I'm not sure that will help.
But he was telling me some funny stories about how he got into places. He would sometimes dress up as a fire inspector and pretend that he was doing photos to check the fire conditions, but all the time he'd be documenting the children working within these factories or down these mines. And he's been crisscrossing the country from Chicago to Florida, working to bring up this issue of child labour.
I've heard of one particular technique he's used before, where he's gone in and, he's saying, I'm a photographer, but I've been sent to like photograph machinery to sort of see like how the tech of American factories are doing. So, and then they'd let him in, and then he'd be about to take a photo of the machine, and then he'd see like a child being exploited who he wants to get a photo of, and then he's like, do you mind just standing in front of the machine, young man, so I can check so I get a sense of the scale of how tall it is, so that way he got his photo of what he came for without sort of the factory owner batting an eyelid.
Yes, exactly. He had many different personas. It's like he almost had a big dressing up box within it. He'd usually be dressed in his suit, tie and hat, but one day he might be a Bible salesman, the next a postcard salesman, as you were saying, like an industrial photographer making a record of these factory machineries, fire inspector. He's a man of many guises, and nothing's going to stop him from doing his documentary work. He even described it as more akin to detective work.
Amazing. And you can see that journalistic thing going on. I believe that some of his kind of blagging techniques, etc., are still used today by journalists looking through stories. It's quite a big deal. The last photographer we looked at when we were last in the US, not the last time, but when we were doing looking at the vanishing Native American tribes, he was all right, our Edward Curtis, but this guy's like, God, there's a brilliant sense of purpose to him. And of course,
Indeed.
He's looking into one of the great injustices. And he's not making the children dress up in traditional Native American dress like our Teddy Curtis. Anyway, sorry, John, I digress. We're standing outside a mill full of exploited children, and I'm babbling on.
Well, yeah, I think what you say is absolutely right. He was a genius in not only photography, but in working his way into these places and managing, without arousing too much suspicion, to take thousands of photographs and to share them with this various commissions that he worked for, the main one being the National Child Labour Committee, who had actually sent him out with this brief to penetrate these institutions and make a record, but all the while sort of doing it undercover, keeping his cover.
Amazing.
So if we go and look through some of these pictures that he's taken from Mason, Georgia, they really are incredible. You do get this sense of scale with the machines very well. These little tiny hands having to work all the choppy bits, like string everywhere, things that will just cause you nasty injuries.
Yeah, it looks so dangerous, like a really dangerous, jagged exercise bike almost.
And you get a sense of how young these children are from these mill photos particularly. They don't look to me to be much older than 8 or 9 or 10, some of these
Aren't you
younger
lucky
ones.
that you get to go to school and play and not have to work?
But that was 1,000 million years ago.
It was a while ago, yes, but not that long ago.
It's very long ago.
So how would you feel if I said, right, you have to wake up really early today and go and work in a factory?
I run away from home, that's what I'd do.
Okay, well what about you, Amelia, if I said you had to go and work in a
I'd
factory?
go run away to hell. Or go to my friends for hell.
Yeah, I'd go to Helena's.
And
But
I'd go to
All of your friends would probably have to work in factories or
Yeah, I'd
farms
go
too.
to my friend, she'd run away together with me, and we'd go to every friend, and we'd all be a lovely group of children walking about, pretending to be grown-ups.
Yeah.
Well, grown-ups have to work, and back then children had to work too.
Yeah, I know, that's what I'd do with my children, and pretend that we were grown-ups who were very rich and that we didn't have to work because we were so rich.
Can you
Yeah,
see this one I'm
there.
looking at now, which is a little girl standing
Yeah.
in the middle of a line of these spinning machines, and she's very well composed by Lewis Hine. He does a great job in focusing his subject. In the centre, they're usually looking right at you, and then he blurs the edges of the machinery and usually sets up interesting angles. This almost looks like a still from a Kubrick film to me.
Yeah, for sure. They're really amazingly shot. You get a real sense of what the faces, the children look so much older than their years. You can see like they're absolutely, completely terrified and sort of quite frightened of adults. You get a sense of that from her posture and face. It's just horrific.
Well, I'm sure you're familiar with some of the British canon of child labour literature, things like Dickens, with Oliver Twist and Nicholas Nickleby.
Actually,
The Water Babies, where focusing on a chimney sweep, and you do have this this idea that the children don't want to really be here; they'd rather be playing or being in school, not having to labour. But they're just putting up with it. They have to do it because that's part of life. That's life as they know it.
I couldn't help but, speaking of literature, English, couldn't help but bring a little compilation of Blake poems with me. And of course, this predates even Dickens, of course, but he wrote a compilation of poems called Songs of Innocence and of Experience. And there's a poem about a chimney sweeper, called The Chimney Sweeper, about a kind of child labourer. There's one poem in each section, but while we're here, in this dark satanic meal, as it were. So it's called The Chimney Sweeper. When my mother died, I was very young, and my father sold me while yet my tongue could scarcely cry, weep, 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 weep. So your chimneys I sweep, and in soot I sleep. There's little Tom Dacre who cried when his head that curled like a lamb's back was shaved. So I said, hush, Tom, never mind it, for when your head's bare, you know that the soot cannot spoil your white hair. And so he was quiet, and that very night, as Tom was sleeping, he had such a sight that thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, Ned and Jack, were all of them locked up in coffins of black. And by came an angel, who had a bright key, and he opened the coffins and set them all free. Then down a green plain, leaping, laughing they run, and wash in a river, and shine in the sun. Then naked and white, all their bags left behind, they rise upon clouds, and sport in the wind. And the angel told Tom if he'd be a good boy, he'd have God for his father, and never want joy. And so Tom awoke, and we rose in the dark, and got with our bags and our brushes to work. Though the morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm, so if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. That's from Songs of Innocence. There's another one later that is a little... in that, of course, he's really condemning God and the establishment for allowing this to happen, and the hypocrisy of all the business.
It's a powerful image, isn't it, of children working so hard and in these quite dangerous professions that they do succumb to death or certainly injury. It was a risk, an occupational hazard, which your child shouldn't have to encounter, but they were on a daily basis. And if I'm looking at this next picture from Saunders Spinning Mill in North Carolina, it's of a little boy. He can't have been much older than 12, 13, and he's holding his hand across his chest. It's all bandaged up, and he's lost some fingers.
Giles, he's called.
Giles, yeah. Piece of machinery had fallen on his foot, and that mashed his toe, and it caused him to yelp out in pain, and he fell over onto a spinning machine, and his hand went into the unprotected gearing, which just sort of crushed and tore out his two fingers.
God.
And their father actually was quite mercenary, I would say, because he tried to reason with the company when he found out that the boy would receive the money and not him directly. So the parents were certainly complicit in a lot of cases for sending their child to work.
Money, survival as well in this ruthless society before really any welfare. Not that it still doesn't have huge problems in our modern day. But yeah, it's horrendous. Of course, what year is it again? 1909.
Mm-hmm.
It's I think this is around the time, or nearly the time as well, when Walt Disney's father will really like go hard on his sons and put them to work delivering newspapers. The difference there is that Disney actually, he forced them to go to school still, and they went to quite good schools. However, he also forced them to do back-breaking newspaper delivery rounds in the absolute freezing snow for like hours whenever they weren't at school, to the point when Disney would fall asleep in school. I haven't seen that going on here with Disney, but I have seen Saving Mr. Banks and read the Wikipedia of it.
What's Saving Mr. Banks?
It's a movie about the making of Mary Poppins, where it's about sort of Disney. Walt Disney's played by Tom Hanks, and Mary Poppins' author P.L. Travers is played by Emma Thompson. It's good. I like it.
On the subject of newsies, the newspaper boys who would be delivering the papers or other messages around the big cities of the US at this time, Nathan Hines, he's taken some more great pictures of these newsies. There's one kid here that I'm looking at. He's sort of jauntily propping himself up against the bike, staring at the camera, and he's smoking a pipe. He claimed he was 15 years old, but this guy looks a lot younger to me. I think he could have been bluffing about his age.
Oh, God. Yeah. It's really hard to tell because, as I say, that they go through just ages them so much. And the miners.
There's a little girl actually in the factory. She was asked questions by Lewis Hine. He got some opportunity sometimes to take some brief notes, and he asked her how old she was, and she just hesitated and said, "Oh, I don't remember." But she then adds, like, confidently, "I'm not old enough. I'm not old enough to work, but still, I've got to do it. I do it just the same."
Yeah, just no way out.
Should we?
I assume your wealthy upper class families' kids aren't generally being treated in this way.
No, it's around like 18 to 20% of children around this time in the early 20th century are at work. So it's not every child by any stretch, but there are plenty who are in such situation that they just have to. It's accepted as a part of life, particularly for the recent immigrant families who we were looking at a couple of episodes ago, coming over on the ship. Maybe they've established themselves now, their families are over, but everyone's got to work in order to make it. The streets are not necessarily paved with gold, and sometimes you have to go down the mine. Should we have a look at some of Hines's
there seems to be
mine photos? Hines in the mine.
Yes, in a second, just while we're on Newsies. So just before we move on to the mine, I thought I'd send you a song from the Disney film/Broadway musical Newsies, about Newsies in this era.
It's got an eye patch.
Hey, we're Newsies! Yeah, I don't know why I sent you this.
I think it would make a good
of
reaction video. Because it's interesting, but I don't want to say too much to incriminate me with like half naked boys getting ready for a day of sweaty newspaper delivery in the Big Apple.
Don't say that. It is a Disney film. We just have to clarify.
Flicking shaving foam across each other's faces.
Well, I think if Lewis Hines today tried his like costume box and slipping in and taking pics of children, he'd be bloody arrested in a heartbeat. No, I'm just documenting child labour.
It's an interesting point because you don't really see.
No, it's not. I was being really flippant.
See such pictures these days because of all the laws against photographing minors, particularly if they're in a precarious position, like often immigrant labour.
Yeah, very true.
At risk of perhaps being having some recriminations against their family or something like this.
Interesting. So you think that interesting? So that although it's good and well intended, can sort of stop people realising the scale of the tragedy in the way that Lewis Hine revealed
I think
here in 1909.
It's a unique historical document, his collection of photographs, because of the access he got. And yeah, it's not really documented in such a way now as that, I don't think. The newsies look very happy, though. Got spring in their step.
Yeah,
a lot of energy.
The sound's off, and I can just see. Yeah, a lot more energy. A lot of energy, given that they spend all their life doing back-breaking work.
Well, there's a very stark contrast to the newsies in one of Nathan Hine's pictures, which is of a newspaper boy just asleep on a stack of newspapers by the stairs, and Hines had taken it very early in the morning. The kid was just like so exhausted from his shift the night before that he was trying to get just a little bit of extra sleep on the steps. It's a really sad, tragic image, actually, that one.
No, and Lewis Hines. I think what you called him, Nathan Hines.
I'm calling him Nathan.
Not that I'm pedantic.
I don't know why.
Good, because last time I kept guessing the photographer's name completely wrong. But yeah, he it's amazing his eye for shots and the way the image there of him sleeping and using the newspapers as a pillow, basically.
This is too boring. Horsey!
So, yeah, a horsey. Would you like to have worked in a farm, maybe?
Yes, I'd like to work in a farm.
You'd have had to pick fruit all day.
Cool, I'd be able to ride horses.
You might be able to ride an odd horse, but you'd have to do the ploughing behind the horse.
Yeah, I know, but still, I'd be able to be with a horse. Still be fun.
And what about you, Amelia, if I made you deliver newspapers all the time?
I will write happy faces on them and give everyone them, and colour rainbow ones, and for them to not be white. I'll do not white black newspapers. Just I'll colour them in rainbow colours, and then I'm gonna give everyone them.
Huh. Well, yeah, you might sell quite a few newspapers by doing that. But you know what? If you sold lots of newspapers, all the money that you made, you'd have to give to me.
Yeah.
Are we going down the mines?
Yeah, we can go down the mines after the newsies have finished.
Oh my god, I forgot.
Sorry, I'm still watching them. Let me.
I'd never.
I need to kill the sound as well because it's quite distracting.
I turned it off ages ago. I don't think I've not even seen it. I just sent it to you because it was, about newsies.
So factories were one thing, but I think being down the mine, for me, that would be the worst job to have as a child. I just really wouldn't enjoy that. Lewis Hine, he went down the mine. Lots of mines, in fact, mainly around Pennsylvania, the big coal country, Kentucky as well. And some of these pictures are very claustrophobic, very difficult to see, I think, as a modern viewer, when you see hundreds of children almost in a frame looking back at you with their dirty, grimy, dusty faces. And this was just their daily reality. You don't wake up and go to school, you wake up and you go down the mine. And this can be from the age of 10 onwards, really.
It's astonishing, and you can just see, imagine how bad the air quality is, all the stuff going into their lungs, the accidents, the collapses and cave-ins, the fact that the bosses, certainly in this mine, have only bothered to put 2 sort of guardrails up on that metal elevator that goes down the shaft. So look, they're packing kids onto that sort of kind of cranking platform elevator, and they're so tightly packed on, it's a wonder none of them are falling down, and I'm sure plenty have.
Yeah, for certain jobs, even in the mine, being a child actually had a higher death rate. I think if you were a a breaker in the mine, then you were 3 times as likely to die doing your role as an adult would doing the same role.
Like a breaker being like the first smash of the coal.
No, I think they were more like breaking it up, and
I don't know why it had to be the first smash.
Like, as it got further down the line in the processing way, but it was still quite upsettingly dangerous. You're wielding pickaxes, and there's big crushing machines around, and you're sort of having to sort out them into different pieces to avoid getting crushed or having some other bad circumstance happen.
It's terrible, and looking around us at all of this, and looking at the images too. It's just it's what I find most depressing is that although it's nice to follow Lewis Hine here, who's going to make a real difference, it's going to take many decades still for legislation to significantly curtail this. It just seems to be like this horrific byproduct of the Industrial Revolution, the quasi-enslavement of children. And it's funny, it's strange, isn't it? Because obviously, as you say, for thousands of years, and I think today as well, even a lot of families would say, like, I like to train my kid in the family business a bit, or they do work experience. Like there's definitely a line there that people accept, but even in this day, once the photos come out, the outrage of the mass scale of it and the scale of the exploitation and the amount that factory owners are making out of exploiting families and children, and it's just heartbreaking. And yes, again, the dark satanic mills of Sir William Blake. Oh dear.
You might actually be a good newspaper seller. Maybe I should take you out of school and put you to work selling newspapers.
No.
Well, maybe you should have more chores around the household. What work do you do now?
Well, now I mop the floor and dust.
Yesterday I cleaned a lot. Remember when I was not dusting, what's it called? Brooming?
Brooming? Sweeping?
Yeah.
I suppose you did sweep the floor yesterday, that was helpful. And you did do some dusting.
Obviously, because I was playing that as a maid. And I did the washing up.
I suppose a few weeks ago you did pick some berries.
Yes.
But imagine having to do that not just for
I know, for
half an hour.
work in a factory, I would like to work in a rainbow factory where I make rainbows.
Okay. I don't think Rainbow Factory was an option. You'd have to work.
There's a horse in the back.
Then I'll be in a sweet factory and I could eat all of the sweets.
No, you'd have to work in like a garment factory or maybe a
What's a garment?
glass factory.
Oh, maybe.
What's a garment?
I want to work.
I'm looking at one picture of a guy called Shorpy Higginbotham, and he was called a greaser, so he comes and carries pails of grease to help oil the mine carts. He's often in danger of being run over by coal cars. He's just 14 here, but he looks a lot younger, all covered in grease.
What's his name again?
He's called Shorpy Higginbotham.
You didn't just make him up.
No, he's
only joking. Only joking.
He's been
I can see him.
by Lewis Hine, because he did write all these notes. So we've got, as I said, quite a good historical record of this.
Well, I can see there's a sort of slave driver, as it were, kicking and prodding the boys into obedience, standing behind them while they break up the coal.
Indeed, they're all like sitting at sort of benches, it seems, or little wooden trestles breaking up coal, and it almost looks as if it could be at school in another life for these kids. They might be at school, but here they're just all of school age and not learning about things that they can hopefully escape this sort of drudgery. They're just doing it from
the way they're sat in rows, isn't it? And you've got obviously the bully behind them, the slightly older boy with a massive stick.
Yeah, ready to prod or kick them into obedience, indeed.
Yeah, and the stuff we read today, of course, about iPhone factories in China, as I said earlier, we sort of outsourced it, out of sight, out of mind. Harder for Lewis Hines is to go around taking pictures there, certainly, and that all would have been factored
indeed
into stuff.
It's a striking picture as well of kids at the bowling alley, and they're not actually bowling playing. They are the ones who physically pick up the pins and rearrange them. And yeah, these kids would be working until midnight or later, while the adults are out having fun bowling. Before you got the mechanical picker-uppers, the frame resetters.
Yeah, like that. I was going to ask.
Yeah.
When do they come into being?
I would assume.
Do they not exist
I would
yet?
assume, round about. I think there'll be a post-war invention: mechanical bowling pickers, frame resetters, or whatever you call them. But yeah, the kids are like sitting slightly up above the bowling lane, ready to hop down and reset them once the pins have been tumbled.
Never liked bowling anyway.
Farm work was also a big industry where kids were employed. So in the cities and towns, you're going to have factories and mills and all the street trades that children can do. But we've got to remember that there are loads of farmers in America at this time as well. So loads of kids who are just working on a farm, and they start work even younger. Like if they can pick a berry, they might be gainfully employed, usually by their family.
Exactly, that's why it's really interesting, isn't it, to sort of work out where they drew the line between the sort of like immorality and basic survival of their business and their family.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was based on necessity. It's not like many parents would have wanted this for their kids if they could have had a different life, but with schooling not being particularly widespread, particularly in rural areas, then yeah, this is what you knew of the world. You would just have children, and they would be expected to pitch in and help out, and yeah, have some minimal schooling maybe, but most of the time, yeah, they have to contribute.
You misunderstand how grim these factories were. They weren't, rainbows and happy faces. They were quite nasty places. You have to work really hard, and you could get injured. You could even get injured. There were some children who lost a finger or something in the machinery.
Yeah, I know. And I'd go to that lady and say, "Hello, I am not actually a child. I am the Queen of France."
The Queen of France? Well, if you were the Queen, you wouldn't have to work. It's true.
So I pretend I'd be the Queen.
Maybe I should have said. Maybe you'd have to work down a mine. Do you know what a mine is?
Mine is a place where you do coal.
Where you dig coal, exactly.
And diamonds, and you're really rich if you work in a mine because you get diamonds every day.
There's a picture of a girl called Callie Campbell. She's 11 years old, and she picks, up to 125 pounds of cotton a day, 20 kilograms or so, just dragging this big sack around. It's not a joyful childhood. And Hines actually made the note when he asked her, "Do you like it?" She said, "No, I don't like it very much." But she's got this stare.
I think you can see a sort of deep distrust as well in all their eyes. Like, because their experiences of adults, it's going to have been so horrific to this point. They were probably a little bit cautious of Hines even. Although as a former teacher, I suppose those were really important skills, along with the photojournalism, being able to talk to children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it definitely helped the fact that he had trained as a sociologist and as a teacher, but also he was very committed to his work.
And an actor,
a
gentleman actor.
He was a great character. I really like this guy, Lewis Hines, who I unfortunately sometimes misname. But he's a good guy, I think.
I assume with his Bible salesman disguise and persona, I assume that's going to be like, "Hello, I've come to spread the word to some of your godless children. May I come in?" I suppose, and then he can chat to them and talk to them and work and sort of work stuff out.
Exactly.
I suppose that would have been quite common.
Yeah, he's got these distinct personas that he can use to get access to these children, to make his photographic record and to collect all these notes as well. But yeah, it's about the best record that we have, I think, of child labour at this time, because he's also documenting their typical hours, their wages, any injuries or ailments they incur as a result of their labour.
No, that's not necessarily true, because you have to give the diamonds to the mine owner.
Not if you have big pockets and like this.
Big pockets. I think they usually check, though. Anyway,
Not
mines
if you
were
put them
very
in
hard.
Wellington boots.
You can't put them in your Wellington boots.
You can.
Or maybe you can. Anyway, mines were hard work. Really hard work. They were probably the worst to be stuck down the mine. Because it was dark as well as dangerous.
I know we can sell makeup and give everyone some new makeup.
Yeah, you did get some pushback against the work of the National Child Labour Committee. For example, the editor of the Southern Textile Bulletin, David Clark, just said it's none of their business. And he just fundamentally disagreed that child labour was a problem. To him, it's just obvious that the employment of children is beneficial to the employer, but he thinks also their family and the youngster, believe it or not, thinking that it builds strong children, keeps them off the streets.
Really strange. People are there's now as queer as folk, Johnny.
Indeed.
There's now as queer as folk.
It was actually very queer to a Native American chieftain. So the September 1906 edition of Cosmopolitan magazine gives us an interesting story of Native American views of child labour at this time. It was basically a chieftain who was giving a tour of the city of New York, shown all the amazing skyscrapers and the Brooklyn Bridge, and taken to the circus, and basically walked around New York. And upon the completion of his journey, he was asked by several of the Christian men who were escorting him, "What's the most surprising thing you have seen?" And the chieftain just replied with 3 words, and that was little children working. And yeah, I think that tells you something about the society of the time, where a lot of these children are going unnoticed. It's just a part of the fabric of American life, and indeed life throughout the world at this time. It's a common sight to see children working. The good thing is people are slowly doing something about it, and they're beginning to raise the age that children can start work and the sort of work they can do, and the hours that they can do. So we're getting small steps in the right direction at this time. Particularly headed by this.
Well, certainly in terms of eliminating it from the West and stuff.
So I was in conversation with one guy in New York while you were out looking at the messenger boys running around, and Edward Devine,
the Newsies.
The Newsies, that's it. Edward Devine was having a chat with me, telling me how he was at dinner next to a gentleman who lives in Brooklyn and raises a cotton farm down in the Texas Panhandle. And he asked him how early the children began to work. And the guy, without hesitation, said, 6, younger, I recall. One boy, 6, who earned 50 cents a day the season through. And he just describing the way that the bag is slung around his neck, dragging on the ground behind, so that then the picker can pick cotton with both hands. And Edward inquired how big the boy had to be before he was strong enough to grab one of these bags. And the Texas Panhandle man, he said, "Well, you see, the bag we make to fit the child." And, finally Edward asked him, what's the effect of all this cotton picking throughout the season on the health and strength of children? And this thoughtful look came into his face, said, I honestly must say it destroys their vitality. So there is this acknowledgement even among the owners that it is exploitation and taking advantage.
He almost sounds like he wants to destroy their vitality, doesn't he? Like just horrific psychopath.
Yeah, he wasn't bothered about any of the schools. He said that it's almost good that that school doesn't have much money, much funding. He thought that it's better to keep not just children but adults as well in ignorance, because ignorance and cotton naturally go together.
Right. Well, charming, eh? Absolutely charming. But even today, it just doesn't. We read stuff about this kind of thing all the time. There was a thing of the Kentucky McDonald's back in the home time, as it were, putting some children to work, like a 10-year-old operating the fryer, and lots of weird little things like this rearing their ugly head, especially as the global economy gets more and more thingy, I suppose. Anyway, that's my cold sick of the moment.
It's upsetting. You are right. It's something that is maybe hidden from us now, particularly us in the West. I think increasingly we kicked it out of our consciousness and into the sweatshops of Southeast Asia or the farms of Africa, these sort of places where, the sight of a 10 or a 12-year-old working might not be so shocking and might be quite normal like it was back in 1909. So history does repeat itself.
History repeats itself, repeats itself. History repeats itself, repeats itself. History repeats itself, repeats itself. History
Just talk a little bit about how things improved, some of the reforms that Hines helped enable. Then we can jump back in the time machine.
As I understand it, you don't get much until the 30s.
So, do you think people like Hines helped push the agenda of the National Child Labour Committee?
Yeah, so I think so. It's clearly a very impressive achievement, and I think it's going to help. But obviously, the forces we're dealing with here and the sort of slightly predatory capitalism, especially of this era, it's going to be slow to change, and probably will take wars really to change.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a problem that's not going away. It's not going to be solved anytime soon, and it's not really until, as you say, perhaps mid-30s. 1938. In fact, that Congress actually passes Fair Labour Standards Act, restricting children from work.
A Franklin Delano Roosevelt bill.
I would assume it would have been around that time, just before the war.
Who, of course, was
the big war.
Slightly related to the current president, Teddy Roosevelt, I think, is the current president. Might have been a while back, actually. Time flies.
I think we'd have to fact check that one.
Yeah, I'm on it.
It's a job for 2.0.
Theodore Roosevelt will leave office, or has left office this year, 1909, March the 4th. Out he went, succeeded by William Howard Taft, the big boy.
Well, Taft does something right because, thanks, I think, in part to the work of Hines and the work of the National Child Labour Committee, in 1912 there's a Children's Bureau established, which is official federal bureau just, devoted to matters related to children, and they're slowly pushing for improvements. You get the Keating-Owen Act in 1916, which limits the amount of working hours for children.
Do you have the figures of what it limits them to?
It does vary through states, but I think it's like 8 hours of work or something. It's a standard 8 hour, the 9 to 5. Yeah, I'm going to say it's the 9 to 5. But it also prohibited the interstate sale of goods produced by child labour, so they're actually cracking down on the profits of the manufacturers here. Of course, this bill gets overturned actually a couple of years later, and this is the problem that we're dealing with. They just keep fighting the forces of capitalism and trying to change ingrained attitudes to child labour.
Money talks.
Money does talk, but that's the 20th century for you. It's not always.
It's all the centuries.
Time
Even when you were schooling your children about child labour, they were coming up with some good ideas to get around it. Well, the Queen doesn't have to work, so we just all pretend to be the Queen.
Well, Amelia picked up a tactic of like upselling the news. Newsies would sometimes make up news if it was a slow news day, or exaggerate the importance of news in order to get some quick sales. Important that their plight was brought to the public attention, though. I think through the lens of Nathan Hine. I've got a lot of respect for him, and that's why the item I brought back is a signed picture of him. It's a self-portrait that he took, and I'm going to pin it in my kids' rooms. Take down their pictures of boy bands and animals, and pin a picture of Nathan Hine so that they remember that he is the guy that is preventing them from having to work hard.
It's not going to be a picture of him dressed as the Bible salesman, is it?
He's actually dressed as a fire inspector.
Great. And which pop stars came down for Hines?
Adele. What did you bring back, Phil?
Hang on a sec. Sorry, I've got it, but I just need to find. Having a little route around, Sars. Bear with me. It's funny you keep calling him Nathan Hines. Lewis Hines. Again, I don't like to.
I don't know why. Maybe
it's completely
I just
normal.
believed he looked more like a Nathan.
But you gave me some flack for that, Edward Curtis. Okay, here we go. It's also a bit of Hines memorabilia, if you like. This, Johnny, is his Graflex camera. Original Lewis Hines camera.
Okay.
He had more than one.
He doesn't miss it. It's not his favourite, is it?
He had more than one. Let's just say.
Okay.
Also, it's a
I'm
Graflex.
expecting some nice pictures from you then.
Yeah, it produces 4 to 5 inch and 5 times 7 inch negatives. So the use of larger format negatives allows greater control over depth of field than what is possible on smaller cameras. Also, he used wide-angle lenses and open apertures to capture more light, allowing a faster shutter speed that reduced blur from movement. He's like a human version of iMovie. Love it.
Doesn't have a selfie mode though, does it?
Well, say cheese.